What does a novelty baseball vendor do in 1981 when there's no baseball? Does he start chucking peanuts at his couch? Does he learn to open beers with his teeth? Those are both admirable trades to have on your resume, but there's one that decided to go to Kings Island and ride the racer over and over and over and over. I'm Ryan Sir, along with that man, Don Helbig, and this is Tower Topics. Tower Topics is a podcast by Kings Island fans for Kings Island fans, because you know what? That's what we are, and that's what we care about the most. Don, 1981, get started.
Well, in a lot of ways, it seems like yesterday, but when you do the math, that was a very, very long time ago.
Mm,
And I was working for Sports Service, uh, sold souvenirs at the Cincinnati Reds games, Riverfront Stadium. It was my first job that I ever had. I'd started that, the year before, 1980. Loved it. Had a lot of fun. I looked at it as I was getting paid to see Reds games, walking up and down the aisles, hawking souvenirs. But the baseball strike came about in early June that year. Now, I had gotten for Easter as a gift a Kings Island season pass. It was my first one. I hadn't used it yet, but the strike starts, and I'm thinking it's not going to last very long. So my brother and I and a friend of ours, we went up to Kings Island, used our pass for the first time, and the Beast was down in the early part of the morning, so we weren't going to be able to ride that. And we go over to ride the racer, and there's a girl working the ride that had graduated with me pretty much like 8 to 10 days before from Anderson High School, and it's one of her first days working the ride, and she she sees a familiar face, and says hi and stuff. So I go through and been riding it a few times, and then just jokingly I just said, hey, Diana, what's the 1 day record? Well, the train goes around, comes back in. She comes back up to me and she said, well, I talked to my supervisor. He's going to talk to the ops, director, and I'll get an answer for you if you're going to be riding this later today. So, we did other rides that day and came back to the racer early afternoon. And, she said that the record was 96 in 1 day, and it
mm.
had been done in 1976. And that also added that it was kind of a rainy day, so there wasn't much of a crowd. So they were able to get, through the line pretty quickly. Well, I thought I would still take a shot at that. So I finished this day with 54 rides. Well, other people in the crew knew that, she was talking about who's that? Well, he lives down the street from me. We went to school together and stuff. He's trying to set a 1 day record. So I come back a couple days later and they're, oh, you going to try to get another record again today? Yeah, I'm going to shoot for it, get 36. Come back a couple days later, get a 64. Well, now I'm over 100, but nowhere close to the single day record. So uh, next thing I know, I'm not going there, 3 days a week. I'm there almost every day now trying to do this. And every day I would fall way short, getting the 30s, the 40s, got a couple 50s. But now I'm hovering and getting right around 500 rides. And the ride crew was keeping track because they'd have to verify that somebody did a 1 day record. The park's not going to say it's a record if nobody can say, yes, we saw him riding it this many times. So I knew what I had, but then the ride supervisor, his name was Fred, great, great guy, um, passed away a couple years later. Uh, but he, came up to me and he said, you're approaching 500 rides. And he said, that's great. And he said, does the park know about this? No, other than you guys, I don't think anybody knows, one of those things. So when I come back in on 500, I didn't know what they were going to do, but the crew, they'd made a 500 sign and
Mm.
had everybody in the station, applauding and everything like that. So that made me feel good that it kind of mattered to them too. The Beast was relatively new, only a couple years old, getting all the attention. So
Mhm.
for the ride associates, they liked the fact that somebody was riding their ride. And around this time, the park's PR staff did become aware of it. They had a thing called, like, it was a Thursday Child type feature that one of the local news stations was doing, and they pointed me out and said, this guy has been here, he's been riding the ride, he's got this many rides on it. And after I got off the ride, um, the person that was their PR manager at the time, her name was Ruth Voss, she comes up to me And then she says, "Hi, honey, my name's Ruth Voss, public relations manager here at Kings Island." She said, "I hear you're here about every day." And I said, "Yes." And she goes, "And just to ride this ride?" "Yes." And then she goes, "And you were working for the Reds, selling souvenirs, right?" And I said, "Yes." And then she said, "Where do you like to eat in the park?" She said, "I'll meet you for lunch tomorrow." So I'm like, "Oh, that's odd." I didn't think what she had in mind or anything, but she wanted to get to know me a little bit, what the backstory was. So in her mind, it's a great publicity story. What does a novelty vendor do when there's no baseball? Well, he comes to Kings Island and rides our racer roller coaster. It's a way to get this coaster, which kind of rekindled America's interest in roller coasters, a way to get it back, out there, because all the attention's on the beast. The bat had just opened, wasn't working all the time, but the bat had opened, so the racer had kind of become the forgotten coaster. So in her mind, this is a great way to get this back out there. So she asked what the goal is. Are you trying to get a certain number of rides? And I said, I'm just going to ride it until the strike's over, and I'll just see where it's at. I had no specific ride number in mind, and I get to where I did end up getting the one-day record. It was August 9th. I rode it 97 times. Now, this is non-consecutive rides, so it's not staying on the ride. The record
Mhm.
was going to be non-consecutive. So she takes that, and while I'm doing it that day, getting close to it, she was able to get a station to come out and do something on that. That this guy was approaching the one-day record, and the next day it was on Channel 7 in Dayton. So that was my first ever media interview. They came back out to talk about setting the one-day record and that I was approaching 1,000 rides. And then on August 14th, that's the day I hit 1,000. Now, what was interesting about that is that I had started this because of the strike. The day I hit 1,000, the strike had ended a few days earlier. The Reds came back from a short road trip, and I had to go back to work that night as a novelty vendor. Doubleheader with the San Francisco Giants that night. They lost the first game 4-0. They won the second game. I think it was 7-6 was the score. Somebody could look it up, but it was 1981, so August 14th. So I worked 2 games, and I ended up making like $116 in commission for the night. So now I'm getting money, which was great because I was basically down to my last $30. At that time, parking's not free. It was 50 cents to park at the time, but it wasn't free. They didn't have dining plans or anything like that, so I'm eating every day. So I blew through my savings that summer, and the timing, was perfect. Strike's over, and now I have money again.
Oh, okay. I'm fact checking
Okay,
you.
I'm fact checking you.
Um,
Uh,
let's see here.
let's see.
So the Reds beat the San Francisco Giants on August 14th, 1981, 7-6.
I had that, okay.
Okay. But I don't know if
And they lost 4-0 in the first game of a doubleheader.
um we really
I do remember that.
hold on. Let me see if I can find because that might previous game. Stand by. We really shouldn't take the oh my God, you're right. All right, Rain Man. Let's talk more about these racer rides. He
But I
literally just
remembered
pulled
that
those up off the
perfectly, and
top of
I
his
really
head.
needed the money that night, so it was great, when the strike ended. And when I got down to Riverfront Stadium, because of all the media coverage that morning on the new news,
Hmm.
my boss at the stadium and all the other vendors, they'd heard about it, and they were all asking me about, what I had done at Kings Island. And one of the obvious questions that I got at that time was, why didn't you just get another job, during the summer?
Your
Well,
job was to ride the
my
racer.
mom and dad, my mom and dad especially, why aren't you getting another job? Was I didn't want to um, get another job because I didn't know when the strike was going to end. So
Yeah.
what happened if I would have got another job? You start that job and 3 days later, strike's over.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to be that person that started a job and then quickly left to go back and do what I was doing for the Reds at the
Yeah.
time. And
So,
so
yeah, you mentioned that there were non-consecutive rides. This is before Fastlane. I know that for a while people were able to like stay on trains if there's nobody in line, but they didn't
yeah,
allow
during this
that.
era, you could not. No, it didn't matter if I was the only person in the station. The rule was you had to exit the ride and get back in line again.
So how long did you wait typically?
On a given day, you got to remember there's no water park at this time.
Hmm.
So all the guests are wrapped around in what is now the main park, So if you had, just say you had 25,000 people in the park, I mean, that's a lot of people in one space, right?
Right.
So, The average wait time for the racer, we're talking 3, 4, 5 roller coasters during that era at the very beginning of it. My average wait time was probably 20, 25 minutes per ride on the racer on average. Now, there were days it would get down to like, 12 to 15 minutes. There were days it would be over an hour. If I was there on a Saturday, I was going to wait an hour to ride the racer. Now, the key was everybody in the morning went to go ride the beast.
Mhm.
So while they're there, I would, you know, be able to get 5, 6, 7 rides really quick within an hour. Then the line at the racer around 11:15, 11:30, then it would start to spill out into Coney Mall. The other thing at that time, and throughout the 1980s, up until 1990 when I got the 10,000th ride, at that time they would start the day with one train on each side of the racer. Not all
Mm.
four trains running. Maintenance was working on the other train. So they waited until the line would consistently stay right outside into the midway, and that's when it was time to put the second train on. So that normally happened right around 11:30, 11:45 range. Well, that was my time where they were putting on the other train and had to go cycle a couple of times again. I would go, eat my lunch at that time. And then I would come back and ride again after they, had it four trains rolling.
Yeah, so, but, you mentioned I know that you had a lot of experience at the park, but, like, when you were especially in the 1981 season when you started this, did you ride other rides, or did you primarily go to the park and ride the racer?
No, I would. I would ride other rides if I knew for sure I wasn't going to get that 1 day record, and it didn't take long. You knew how many you had to average an hour to be able to do that. Um, yeah, I would go ride. I would try to get, 3 or 4 beast rides in if I could. And that oftentimes, sometimes would be right away in the morning or to slip over there around 5 or 6 o'clock at night when everybody was eating dinner. The ride, the wait time for the beast would kind of shorten at that point in time. So I kind of figured out, what was the opportune time to get on the beast. What was the opportune window during the day to ride the racer? What was the opportune time for some of these other rides? So I kind of started to get that, calculated in my head. So I kind of knew the park, knew what the wait times were on average around the park. When were the food lines going to be the shortest? Things like that.
Mhm.
And that really helped, be able to do what I was doing on the racer. Now, if I just stayed in line while they were putting on the other train, you know, that was 2 or 3 different rides that I could get in, either right before or right after I ate lunch on something else, whether it was a scrambler, the antique cars, maybe I wanted to go ride the turnpike cars,
Mhm.
which were there back in the 80s. So I had a plan on how I was going to attack the park and what I was going to be able to maximize my day to get the most out of that day and get other rides in just besides the racer.
So, when you broke the, like, the single day record, you mentioned Ruth Voss, was able to, alert the media and stuff, and there was some interest. What were some of the bigger stories? I mean, was the allure of the story that this, out of work, sports vendor was riding the racer instead, or was it, like, the milestones? Like,
Yeah,
what was
I
the
don't
allure?
think it was. Yeah, I don't think it was. He's going to get 1,000 rides on the racer that attracted the media's attention, or even the single day record. Now she'd been alerted, midday that I was pacing and tracking well to get that by the ride crew. So she was keeping on top of that day. But for the media and for what she was pitching, and there were other PR people there at the time too that were involved in this. The story angle and what got the media interested, was what does this novelty vendor do when there's no baseball? Oh, he goes to the park all the time. That's how he's spending his summer around, waiting for the strike to end. So that was more, I think, was more of the interest for the media than the number of rides I had up to that point. Now, once it got into the 4 or 5,000 range, then it became more about the numbers I was accumulating. But early on, the whole story revolved around here's this novelty vendor. He's got an unwanted summer vacation. What's he doing with it? He's going to Kings Island to ride a roller coaster over and over
Yeah,
again.
and ever
That's
if
what
you
that
ever
was
you
about.
had like a testament for Ruth Voss's storytelling ability, and granted, like your story was a really great story, and the allure was obvious, and she was able to identify that. But I think that what she was trying to do from a marketing standpoint was like, you also don't have the Reds to watch. Why don't you go to Kings Island instead? The
Exactly.
power of
And we're
storytelling,
a
right?
great entertainment option for you. Exactly. If you're looking to fill your summertime here. So yeah, I mean, she looked at it from all different angles, and I learned so much just being around her for that decade of the 80s that it was just invaluable, and it really paid dividends for me once I started my PR career first in professional hockey in 1990, and then subsequently into the amusement park industry with Kings Island in 2007.
Yeah, I pitched my idea too when you managed the PR, and it was, Jerk rides Whitewater Canyon, gets his shoes wet, he hates that, but I don't think the media would pick up on it. Well, okay, so
No, no,
let's wrap this up, like, what's your fondest memory of the '81 season? Like, what's the big thing that sticks out to you?
the people. The people I met that year. I was very, shy, introverted. Uh, I was not comfortable when they started to bring the cameras around and, had the reporters out wanting to talk to me. I have it, but I would hate to go back and look at that tape of my first ever interview, uh, with the Dayton station, or even my 1000th ride, with the media, the newspaper articles. I'm not going to read what my quotes or anything were in that because, I'm sure they were horrible. I didn't know what to say, what they were looking for. Later on, I learned what I could say to make the story more compelling, um, to get more space because did you become this, you know, I guess character or whatever that's riding his rides, and I knew what the park needed at that point in time to really have the story carry. So I'll jump forward real quick, but there was a time in '86 when I was going for 6,000 rides. Well, 5,000 was the year, a couple years before. So now it's 6,000. That's a little bit of an odd number. So one of the reporters said, how much longer are you going to go? And I just said, I don't know. I guess I'll keep riding until Pete Rose, quits playing baseball. We both have done our thing longer than we should have, but well, the headline is coaster enthusiast vows to keep riding until Pete Rose quits playing baseball.
Totally not what you said, but what a great story.
No, but then, then, I did find out later that Pete Rose thought it was funny, and Pete Rose, you know, kind of joked and he says, well, he goes, when I stop playing baseball, he goes, there better be some guy at Kings Island's not riding a roller coaster anymore, with that. But just things like that I knew that headline by saying something like that would get it to go a lot further, than just staying within the region. That now all of a sudden gets the LA Times interested, the New York Times interested, the Boston Globe interested. Now it's going to make all these papers because of the headline, not just coaster nut ride 6,000 times. But you were back to 1981, though. I think it was the people. Um, I started to feel more comfortable around people, talking to people, opening up a little bit more, letting people get to know me a little bit. That was not the case, growing up through high school and that. So the racer really kind of opened that up for me, and it's the people. I keep talking about that. Ruth Voss, some of the other people that I got to know, Kings Island through the year. Doug Kramer was working there. He was still seasonal at the time. Don Miller
Mhm.
was a seasonal employee. He spent many years at Kings Island in the Kings Island Hall of Fame. So those those people, then the racer crew. There's a lot of them that I still stay in touch with today from the 1981 crew, and that's really what I remember the most. Not necessarily the rides. Um, so yeah, that's my takeaway from the '81 season was just the people.
Yeah, what a story. And obviously, I think anybody listening to this podcast would know how that story turned out. But I don't want to spoil anything because I imagine in future episodes we'll talk about. But spoiler alert, you were on Good Morning America and stuff. But let's do that for a different episode when you sort of hit 10,000 and got national attention and ultimately ended up having Ruth Voss's job. But that story's for a different day. All right. Well, I'm Ryan Sir, along with the crazy coaster rider that stopped riding the racer when Pete Rose stopped playing baseball, Don Helbig. And this is Tower Topics.